Today on Locked On NBA, the Warriors and Pelicans get chippy, and KD is back, baby. That's coming up next on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. A look around the league Monday through Friday, brought to you by an assortment of Locked On NBA Network hosts. Today's episode, by the way, brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. If you ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your own basketball franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, in all caps, Locked On. In the game, I am Andy Kamenetzky, co-host of the Locked On Lakers podcast, joined to you by Brendon Kleen from Locked On Suns, who's going to bring us some of his perspective on Kevin Durant's imminent return tonight against the Timberwolves. But first, Brendon, Warriors Pelicans, pretty physical, really fun game closing out the second half of the TNT doubleheader. A lot of jawing, a lot of turnovers, and in the second half, a flurry of Golden State points, 74 in the second half. Steph Curry finishes with 39. Jordan Poole, 21 off the bench. Kevon Looney was an offensive rebounding, and in a lot of ways, game-turning machine. What were your impressions from this one? Because there were a lot of implications. The Warriors and Pelicans, I believe, had been next to each other in the standings, although it can be really difficult to remember now where exactly everything was because 4 through 12 remains so insanely bunched. But the Warriors now back into the playoff mix at 6. What were some of your takeaways?
It felt like Draymond Green really wanted a suspension. It seemed to me like he just wanted to get it out of the way. They play the Spurs next on, I think, Thursday, and maybe he had circled that game on his calendar, and he had 2 texts. He was 2 texts away from 18. He was trying to get them both out of the way in one fell swoop, and then somehow the refs just determined that they were in on it on the opposite end and said, no way are we allowing his sneaky attack here to actually pay off. And so a couple of reviews and then a couple of calls that could have gone either way. He ends up with 1 tech and 1 flagrant when it's all said and done, and endless minutes wasted of all of our time. But no, he was the instigator, as he always is. No Jose Alvarado for the Pelicans. Otherwise, I think this thing might have gotten completely off the rails. But yeah, a big win for the Warriors. It felt like the road Warriors kind of showed up in the first half, and then the home Warriors came back and checked in for the second half, as you mentioned, 74 points, and a much more characteristic game for these guys that they really need, because I doubt they want to deal with the play-in after they got ousted in it a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's funny with Draymond, this has been him his entire career. And obviously he's been a critical part of these 4 Warriors championships and these other trips to the finals. And he's the straw that stirs the drink defensively for this team. I mean, he's still, even at this stage of his career and some physical decline, he is still in a lot of ways the most valuable part of it. But I also wondered too, and I was thinking about this during this game, and ultimately the Warriors ended up winning, and Draymond did make some good plays along the way. I think a lot of those antics feel either more necessary to the fabric of the team or something that you can look past more when the Warriors are at their most invincible. Like, the more vulnerable they are, the less I feel like that they can automatically just say that's Draymond being Draymond. Like, there was a point where Steve Kerr pulled Draymond off the floor and subbed him out, I believe, for Jonathan Kuminga. And Draymond clearly wanted to stay out there, and Kerr was like, no, you need to cool down. He was probably back out about 90 seconds later. But we're not far removed from Steve Kerr being asked about the technicals and saying that, Draymond has always known how to walk that line, not take it too far. and him getting suspended like 2 games later, something like that. So
Yep.
when you see this team right now that, the Warriors reminded you in the second half, they're still a dangerous team, but we've seen all course of the season, they're also beatable. They're a more beatable team than they used to. Like they may not have the same margins for dealing with some of that stuff with Draymond, but man, Steph can still absolutely just destroy you. And I don't know if there's ever been anybody in the league whose shots can be more deflating than that guy.
No. Yeah, there was that stretch in the third quarter where you mentioned Looney had 6 offensive rebounds in the game, and it felt like just 2 or 3 possessions in a row. I mean, I think it might have actually only been a couple, but there might have been multiple offensive rebounds on 1 or 2 of them, and they ended with Curry threes off of Looney, sort of tossbacks off of those offensive rebounds. And it is just, it's so deflating to feel like everything you're doing defensively is working in a given possession. And I actually thought the Pelicans, I mean, they're a top 10 defense quietly in the NBA this year. And you did feel that at times in this game. It just, they didn't have, I think, enough offense, honestly, especially when Ingram wasn't out there, to sort of keep control of the game, keep the pace on their terms, even when their defense was working. And then Curry's just going to kind of pop the balloon when he finally gets one to go in, and it's going to happen eventually. But to your point on Draymond with the being able to deal with some of the mistakes, what's funny to me is that I think you could actually say the same thing about Jordan Poole. This felt like one of the better Poole games that I've seen from start to finish this season. I mean, he only had 21 points. I'm sure he's had bigger points totals, but when you look at the fact that not a lot of it came from behind the arc, and he didn't turn the ball over much. He was really great at attacking closeouts, getting into the teeth of the defense, doing things in transition. He's a player the same way where, the margin for error has shrunk for him this season as they've lost depth, and Andrew Wiggins has been out for a long time now with this personal situation that he's dealing with, apparently in Minnesota, not even with the team. Poole has to be great, and he hasn't been as good this year, and it's very noticeable when he's not. So I guess kudos to him on a night where he did have it. You got to give him the credit there too. And he was pretty good. They were able to play super small with all 3 of their scoring guards, plus Kuminga and Draymond for a lot of this game, which don't know how far that's going to get you in the postseason with so little size out there. But for tonight, it worked.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, I don't really know how far anything is going to get you for any of these teams in the West in the playoffs. Like, if I had to pick a team to come out of the West, I'm going to pick Denver, just because I think they've been consistently the best team in the league, or in the West, I should say. And they've got a lot of experience, and some of the defensive issues that they've had in the past, I think, get mitigated more by having Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown on this team, and not being forced at times to play someone like a Michael Porter Jr. in crunch time when you're really not feeling solid about that. But all of these teams feel I was going to say all these teams in the playoffs, but we still have no idea who that's going to be. They all feel beatable in some ways. Like I was recently doing Access Lakers on Spectrum Sportsnet. They're the television partner for the Lakers. I appear on there, once or twice a month. And I was asked which team I thought was the scariest in the West. And my response was the Kings. Really. And the reason was, just their offense is for real and it's hard to stop. But also, too, like, I feel like they have a weird psychological advantage over some of these teams in that the pressure to beat them is going to be so much higher than just about everyone else, because they have no track record. There's still the expectation that the Kangs are going to Kang, and Sacramento is going to be Sacramento. And I feel like they have a unique pressure that they put on everybody else that nobody else can really speak to. And for something as weird as this season, maybe that can be a difference maker, because it's really hard to figure out what would greatly separate any of these teams from each other.
Yeah, especially because I think the weird thing this year, the past couple, it's been injuries, right? Like Denver, the Clippers, the Warriors, a lot of these teams, the Pelicans haven't even had Zion, and maybe they won't this year either. But a lot of it was just sort of, well, who's going to be the healthiest, who's going to sort of get healthy at the right time. And that was a lot of what decided some of these West series in years past. But everybody's basically healthy. I mean, the Paul George thing is a question mark, but everybody who we expected to come back outside of Zion, I guess, is basically here. And so you can't even really point to that. I guess there's the element, as we're about to talk about with Durant, of like, how much time do you have? But then you're getting into really sort of semantic and ridiculous stuff. I hear your point on the Kings. I think there's something similar to be said with the Timberwolves in terms of a lot of teams in the West have a lot of pressure on them this season. Denver even being the front runner, I don't think it'll be a great summer over there if they don't go pretty far, right? Whereas I would even say Memphis is sort of in that camp, although, they have their own drama, of course, with Ja and Dylan Brooks, who also is a free agent on top of all of his shenanigans every night and whatever. But they're not really worried about it, right? Either they're young and they're still kind of on the upswing. So I wonder if that does pose a little bit of a factor, especially early in series where, somebody steals a game or two just because, we're just loose. We're out here. We're just doing our thing in a way that maybe other teams kind of tighten up and aren't able to. I don't hate that as, with how crazy things are, a way to try to distinguish between all this, because you're absolutely right. It is impossible to decipher right now. And I feel like we'll enter round 2 and still feel like we don't know much about the West, to be honest with you.
Well, like I said, this win by the Warriors has them as the current 6th seed. Everyone listening will wake up to 4 through 12 as Phoenix, Clippers, Warriors, Timberwolves, Pelicans, Lakers, Thunder. That's the line. And then you got the Mavericks at the 11 seed, but they have the exact same record as the Thunder. And then the Jazz, who I think at this point are done, but they're technically still close enough at the 12. But, this is kind of like the weather in the Midwest. If you don't like it, wait an hour. It's going to change. But speaking of the West and potentially big difference makers, Kevin Durant will be making his return for Phoenix in a big game against the Timberwolves. Suns obviously need him. What does this do for the landscape of the West? Nobody knows this better than Brendon, so we're going to get his perspective coming up next. And Locked On NBA is brought to you by Ultimate Pro GM. I am really excited by this new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Pro GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your own basketball franchise, that dream can come true with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Manage every strategic aspect of your team during the season. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and even the assistant coaches, training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft and all the ups and downs of the season. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free. It's playable offline. You can play it on the go whenever you want, however you want. And Locked On NBA listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That promo code has to be in all caps, Locked On. So make sure to check it out. Download the game. Just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or you can look up in the App Store. Again, probasketballgm.com, promo code Locked On in all caps. Start your dynasty today. All right, so Kevin Durant making his return 3 weeks to the day after that left ankle sprain. And I mean, it goes without saying that Kevin Durant being back helps the Suns, but who would you say on this team right now, Brendon, would benefit the most from KD being back?
It's a great question. I think the obvious answer would have been Devin Booker. We saw Booker come back right around the same time that from an injury, right around the same time that Durant made his Suns debut. And Booker is, a top 15 or so, 10 or so player in the league who is going to be feasting on, the second best defender and wide open spaces he's not used to. But ever since Durant got hurt, Booker has not really missed a step at all. He's playing some of the best basketball of his life. And so I almost hesitate to say he could even do more or really, produce at a higher level because he's been great. Obviously, his life will be a little bit easier, but I think the honest answer is not as sexy, but it's the bench. This is a Suns bench that after the trade and even prior to the trade had been very suspect. It doesn't have any two-way players, basically reliable two-way players. It is a makeup of specialists and maybes and whatever else. And so what they did with Durant in the 3 games that he played earlier in the year was just, okay, we'll put 4 guys out there from the bench and we'll put Durant out there. And lo and behold, as most lineups with Kevin Durant tend to do, they outscored everybody by a ton and it worked. And so you've seen the Suns bench pick up lately, especially offensively, just really blitzing teams with TJ Warren and Terrence Ross scoring a bunch of points. So maybe they don't need it. Maybe the rotation looks a little different, but that's probably my answer because the starters are fine. Booker is great. They have an infrastructure. They've played together for a long time. It's mostly who's going to lift up those other guys. I don't think Chris Paul is at the point in his career where it's going to be him anymore. The answer had been Durant for the small stretch that he did play. I think it would be him again, and that kind of is all that they're really wondering about with this team is can those other guys do just enough? Because the top 4 is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, Zach Lowe over at ESPN, host of the great Low Post podcast, he always talks about how Kevin Durant is the most malleable superstar in the league now, maybe in NBA history. And just that if there's anybody that you can just drop into a lineup and everything just feels figured out by, sort of definition of him being there, it's KD. And I'm going to be really curious to see exactly how that plays out because, he barely played with them before getting hurt. And when the Suns made this deal, it obviously was seismic, but I did not have them as the front runner in the West the way a lot of people automatically did, just because I wasn't sure there would be enough time for them to really figure out who they were, particularly with being such a top-heavy team and having to make some defensive adjustments, without Bridges there and even Cam Johnson, I think, to some degree. But the West being as crazy as it is, and, like we talked about earlier, nobody really having these decided advantages over everybody else. This is going to be a real test of that theory of just how much Kevin Durant connects everything in addition, just elevating everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you saw the team you cover hand it to the Suns a little bit last week, and there's been some panic about the role players and sort of supporting cast, maybe disappointing some onlookers around the NBA. What did you think of this squad? Obviously we know they had a Durant-sized hole there, but just did you feel as worried about Phoenix seeing how those other guys played in his absence, or do you feel like Durant can lift them up?
Well, I mean, Kevin Durant, just so much attention ends up on him. And then when you combine the attention that's also there on Devin Booker, like figuring out how to account for both of those guys, with Chris Paul, even at this stage of his career, being able to find guys in the best spots, that is going to be a nightmare to try to scheme against. I do have concerns about how they can figure out a defensive scheme that works against, a lot of offenses around the West that are pretty good themselves. I mean, they do feel like a pretty top-heavy team. And even somebody like Shamet or Ross or Warren, when they're playing well, I still wonder, particularly with like Ross and Shamet, how much you can get away with them out there over extended minutes without some of the defensive issues coming up. It's going to be interesting to see how Monty Williams puts all of this together. I'm sure there's been a lot he's been trying to figure out in his mind, like exactly the combinations that he would throw out there and the floor combo, stuff like that. But it's still going to be different once it's actually in practice. And It's funny. The Locked On Lakers that everybody should be listening to today. We talked about the Lakers' 7 remaining games, and we were trying to handicap exactly what was happening down the stretch. And they play Phoenix the second to last game of the season for them. And Phoenix could. I mean, you never say anything in this West right now, but Phoenix could potentially be in a place where they're locked into a seed and can't. I doubt they're going to be able to move up at all, but maybe they can't even move down. And normally in situations like that, you start resting your stars. I actually said that I would be surprised if that happened with Phoenix, just because they need the court time together. Like, you might see Devin Booker and KD play 20 minutes, maybe something like that, 20, 25, lower than their usual amount against the Lakers in that game. But I would be really surprised if those guys didn't play every game for the rest of the season, just because they don't have the luxury of sitting them for the playoffs. They need to figure out how to play with each other.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And last year, the Suns, blitzed the league and got the 1 seed and had it in hand, and they got the team record, franchise record for regular season wins. They got that even before the end of March, and so they were in a position to sit some guys. And I don't think it's explains what happened in the second round by any means when they lost to Dallas, but they got off to a pretty sluggish start actually in round 1 against New Orleans. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they, had a weird. I just don't advocate for doing that really at any point. I would tend to lean toward what you just said of maybe limit some minutes, maybe have, longer rotations, heavier, bench run. But you just take yourself out of rhythm by doing that, let alone a big pressure cooker situation like this where, the Suns need every minute that they can get. Durant hasn't been practicing much during this whole absence either by any account. So they just don't, it's not going to be hard, but you also don't really want to, they're only going to get 10 games here. You don't want to cut it back anymore from that. To come full circle on this, and the Lakers game that we were referencing a second ago, that was a perfect example of a matchup that I think that this Suns team is still going to struggle with. A game where Durant has to play elite defense against an opposing star. I think in this matchup with even LeBron back, you're probably talking about Durant guarding Davis at times, maybe not in the starting lineup. Maybe that's Ayton, but there's just not a lot of options for this Suns team to throw at guys like that. And you very quickly get to Durant having to, how long is his to-do list every night, right? And so that's a concern. And it starts with this Minnesota game, which is a big one. You keep referencing how tight the West is. If the Wolves win this game, they're going to move within a half game of the Suns and basically effectively take the tiebreaker against them. Yes, Minnesota. Like, that's how crazy this West is. And so the Suns are going to have to be doing all of these things we're talking about while also not sacrificing winning. They need to keep winning to be where they want to be in the conference from a standing standpoint. So not an easy task, and it starts tomorrow.
No, better mop up that floor really, really carefully.
Yeah, exactly.
During this game. Like, you put all those mop boys on notice. Like, seriously, this is the most important mopping you will ever be doing. You look for every single drop of sweat out there. We cannot afford to have this happen. Like, they're going to be out there inspecting every single inch of that court.
If I'm them, I don't even. I just nix the pregame warmups for the rest of the year. Like, Kevin, I understand you need what you need to get warm. You need what you need to be ready to play. We'll have the training staff stretch you out in the locker room pregame, but you are not to step foot on the wood at all until tip off. Like that, you're not even doing like very, very pregame, just getting shots up, getting loose like they do, like in the warm up jerseys. Like, you're not even doing that. Like, we're only using you when we absolutely need you. Because it was as bizarre of an injury as I think you'll ever see in the NBA, considering the moment and stakes and all that. But we have real or fake to get to in the final segment, taking on our John Corrales and Jake Madison personas here to close out the Tuesday night Locked On NBA. We'll talk about the Hall of Fame class, which in part got announced on Tuesday via ESPN. First, I want to tell everybody about FanDuel, which is the #1 sports book in America. And there's no better place to get in on the tournament action than FanDuel. That's because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net. Of course, not just in the tournaments, but you have NBA odds every day. You have soccer odds all over the place, all over the world on a day-by-day basis, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Okay, so Andy, the Hall of Fame class got announced, and it's an amazing one. And so we were going back and forth. We were going back and forth on what to do in terms of this real or fake segment that that John and Jake tend to do on Tuesday nights. And what we came up with is this the best Hall of Fame class ever? And there's some sleuths on the internet that have done some rankings in the past, but it's going to be hard in terms of the star power and the sheer volume of people getting inducted to pass this one up. You're just talking about legend after legend in this class.
Yeah, for people unaware of the class, it was announced that, or source, I should say, it's being reported, different sources, different outlets, including Adrian Wojnarowski at ESPN, Dwayne Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, Greg Popovich, Pau Gasol, Tony Parker, Becky Hammon. That is an incredible class. Like when you think about this, Dwayne Wade, 3-time champion, finals MVP, franchise icon, greatest Heat ever. Dirk Nowitzki, finals MVP, greatest Maverick ever. Tony Parker, I think, I can't say this with certainty, but I think best player ever from France. Finals MVP, multiple-time champion. Pau Gasol, best player ever from Spain, 2-time champion. Becky Hammon, legend as a player, already off to an incredible start as a coach. And
yeah, she added a championship to this mix.
With the
in
Aces.
Real time. She's just bringing more along. Yeah,
first season ever after breaking ground in her own right, spending time alongside Greg Popovich, who you can make the argument is the best coach in NBA history. Like, if you're going to make it a count the rings thing, like strictly count the rings, then he's not going to win. It's going to be Phil Jackson. Nobody's ever going to beat Phil. But if you want to try to break this down in terms of just pure coaching skill or, the consistent ability to get the most out of your team's longevity, shape shifting, all of that stuff, Popovich is at least in that conversation. Like you were saying, Brendon, just like the scope of this class when it comes to American basketball, international basketball, coaches, the women's game, this is an amazing class.
Yeah, you're talking about three, as you were listing it off, right? I mean, players who are the best or among the best ever from their countries, from 3 different countries, and by my quick tally as you were talking, I believe if you include Becky Hammon's WNBA championship, which you do because it's a basketball Hall of Fame, not an NBA Hall of Fame, I think it's 18 championships among this group altogether. I might have actually shortchanged with Dwayne Wade. So he has 3, right?
He has 3.
Yeah, 3.
He got one with Shaq, 2 with LeBron.
Yeah, I think it's 18 titles among this group, which is
Dirk is the slacker. He's
insane.
the only one with 1.
Yeah.
Dirk, think about this from a championship perspective. Dirk Nowitzki ends up your weak link. That's how good this class is.
Yeah. So to go through some of the previous great ones, 2009 was Michael Jordan, David Robinson, and John Stockton. In 2020, which I think I probably would have had as the previous best, was Kobe, KG, and Duncan. Honestly, that one might still
That's
surpass this one.
that's an
Uh,
amazing
yeah.
class.
Yeah.
That's really strong.
That one's like an era defining,
Yes.
just sort of generational, like these three players in a lot of ways just defined an entire, span of basketball history. That's pretty
Plus
amazing.
what was really awesome is Kobe and Duncan, they played their teams basically were swapping trips to the finals for like 6 or 7 straight years in the Western Conference. Duncan and KG had a rivalry that often, frankly, got pretty nasty, but it was really entertaining to watch. Two of the greatest big men ever. Kobe and Garnett played against each other twice in the finals, split those. Lakers Celtics, like that's just amazing. And the three of them did have a pretty healthy respect for each other, no matter how heated that stuff got.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things about this year too. The one that just got announced today is, Wade and Dirk had two finals against one another. You had obviously Wade versus the Spurs in the two back-to-back finals to close out LeBron's tenure with Miami, and just getting to kind of I always love. I mean, it's the announcements is one thing, but I always love get the coverage of the actual commencement and enshrining of the players when it happens, and then their speeches, obviously we all love, but kind of when you get to see these people put on a pedestal compared to one another, it brings back not only their own careers but the memories of them competing against each other. But 2010 was another big one. Karl Malone, Scottie Pippen, and then they honored, I didn't even remember that this had happened in this way, but they honored the entire 92 Dream Team that year.
Okay.
So that feels like cheating.
Okay. I'm calling BS on that one. Honestly, like I people might think this is a hot take, but I actually don't think it is at all. I think it's actually an honest take. The Dream Team thing was one of the most overrated overrated achievements in recent sports history. Like that team was stacked at a time when the rest of the world really wasn't playing basketball. Like, of course, they were going to kill all of those teams. Like, those teams had no chance whatsoever. Like, I'm sorry, the 2008 USA team that beat Spain in that incredible finals, you had the Gasol brothers on one side and Kobe, LeBron, Melo, Wade. Like that was a much better achievement in my mind because that's when the world actually started catching up. I remember at the time, like watching 92 being like, I don't understand what everyone's getting so excited about. Of course they're winning these games. Like some of these countries, I'm like, do they even play basketball? Like what was it, Lithuania? Yeah. They needed to have like Bill Walton supply them with tie-dyed uniforms. Seriously, I'm sorry, it's true.
No, as an accomplishment, your argument is well taken. The Basketball Hall of Fame does love to do this sort of, what it meant to the game types of enshrinements at times. Yes. Like that's, I had the question when it first came up with the fact that Pop was eligible. I didn't understand why, and I think coaches, it was something like either he's being honored in a way that isn't related directly to his current career as a coach, or that coaches are just subject to different rules or whatever. But the Basketball Hall of Fame, I know people get mad that everyone gets in, but it's also a little flowery with some of the ways that it does things. So I think maybe that was the idea with the Dream Team thing, more so than like their on-court dominance. But I hear you. The last one here on the list is Shaq, Iverson, and Yao in 2016,
that's pretty great.
And that's like one of those things too, with Shaq and Yao getting to kind of be there together. And they obviously had so many cool battles, and it kind of took over the basketball world when they would compete. So I don't think that one has the star power, but it's a cool one.
You know what though? That one, what I think is really great about them is that's a great class when it comes to just cultural icons, like
Yeah.
and players that really shaped the culture of the league at a time, and you can feel their influence moving forward. Like Iverson, ushered in a lot of mainstreaming hip hop culture into the NBA. He took a lot of attacks for doing that. Shaq was somebody that really started, bringing in the idea of a hyphenate into the league. And Yao, on top of being an incredible player, like he proved that when you're great and you have like a personality that shines through, things like a language barrier, you can work around that. You can be creative. Like, he had that great commercial with the Yao, and he was so likable that the language barrier, which often I think leagues use or companies use as a built-in excuse not to go to certain players. Yao showed how, there are certain guys that just it's worth the time and creativity and investment. And he was a great guy. I really was a big fan of Yao. Final thought from me, just thinking about this with Powell, it's going to be really hard not to think about Kobe, because Kobe would have been the one, I can promise this, who would have been inducting Powell. He would have been the obvious call. He would have been the one that Powell wanted. And it's similar to what just happened with Powell's jersey getting retired by the Lakers. In a lot of ways, it becomes a celebration and remembrance of Kobe as well.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like we're going to be out of that that range for a while. It feels like the reminders and it's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's going to overshadow a lot for a while, I think. And this will be another example of it. I wish it has to be somebody in the Hall of Fame to do it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say Marc Gasol could easily fill in, but it has to be somebody already there. I wonder who it'll be.
Were I to guess right now, it'll be either Phil Jackson or I wonder if they would make an exception and allow Vanessa Bryant to give a speech inducting Powell on behalf of Kobe. But otherwise, my guess is it's going to be Phil.
Yeah. Well, then we'll get a Phil Jackson appearance out in the world again. Yeah. That'll be its own form of fun.
He doesn't do it often, but I think he showed up when Powell's number got retired. I think he would do this for Powell.
Yeah. All right, so it sounds like we're in agreement. Is this the best Hall of Fame class ever?
You know what? If someone wants to say it, man, I'm not going to argue. This is a great class. This is really, really good. Congrats to all those guys. And
it should be a blast as it gets announced, apparently, in Houston this weekend. Then, obviously, the festivities when they are formally put in later this year. So that'll wrap us up today, though, guys. Thank you for listening to Locked On NBA, making it your first listen to get ready for your day across the whole National Basketball Association. The playoffs are right around the corner, so thank you for making us part of your daily routine. Subscribe or follow wherever you're finding the show, including YouTube. Drop a comment below, have some fun, be part of the community that way. Your next host will take care of you tomorrow, so catch that show every single morning. Tomorrow morning, of course, and we will talk to you then.